Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is one of the samurai from Fireforge games. Now these guys are from a plastic box set and I don't want to do a full review, but they're alright, they are pretty good. And there are one or two areas where detail is maybe a little bit soggy, but for the price and the number that you get in the box, I'm really not that fussed. They paint up well, so just something to look for if you are looking at doing a large mob of samurai. So the paints on this one are going to be mostly speed paints because I wanted to try and tackle something a little bit differently. And yeah, the method itself is not too difficult. Unfortunately, there's no way of getting around the painting those laces that I've figured out. So that's where things are going to slow down. All the same, it is relatively simple. So the paints for this one will be listed in the description below. Same as always, let's get started. So once you've got your miniature assembled, first thing to do, of course, is to prime him. Now here I've used matte white from the Army Painter, but I would suggest any white is going to work perfectly well here. You could also start from a very light grey or a bone colour. The main thing here to bear in mind is because we're going to be painting quite a few relatively light colours, working from a lighter primer like white or similar is going to give us more opportunity to kind of choose what we're going to work down from rather than starting from something like black and having to work our way up through several stages for a bright color to go over top. This just gives us a little bit more leeway. Now, the trouble is sometimes working from white, it can actually make it a little difficult to see what you're doing. So weirdly enough, we're going to begin this with a shade. Now what I've mixed up in my little palette here, this is half and half strong tone and Speedpaint Medium. All we're going to do is apply this over the entire miniature. Now, it doesn't need to be heavy. All you want to do is just let it settle in the recesses and do some of the work for us so that we can see what we're doing. As well, for some of these colors, this is going to essentially work as a pre-shade for when we apply something over the top. When you get to big flat areas like the flag, this is where using a larger brush comes in handy because you can just straight down the thing without letting it really collect anywhere too heavily. Now there we go. He's nice and light. We are going to be able to paint very bright colors over the top without issue, but we can see a lot more clearly what we're working with. Now, it does dry a little bit more reasonable than it looks when it's going on. What I am going to do though, is because I'm going to be using speed paints in some areas, I want a slightly lighter high point to most of these parts. So to leave the shading intact, what I'm going to do is get my flat dry brush here and some Brainmatter Beige. Now as much as possible here, I want to be dry brushing across areas of detail in order that I'm picking up just the high points and leaving my shading in the recesses. Now particularly on his clothing, this is going to be super useful, but it is going to make a bit of a difference to the armor and stuff as well. So the same as when we're painting any other miniature, we're going to start from areas that are going to be difficult to reach and when we're likely to make a mess if we try and come back to them later. As with most guys, that's going to start with his face. So what I have here, this is Peachy flesh. Now I'm using this because as it goes on, you'll see it settles quite nicely. And where it does settle, it's not super red. Now it's come up on the channel a couple of times before when I've painted other samurai. But having been to Japan a couple of times, fantastic trip by the way, you should definitely take the opportunity if you can. Japanese folks aren't yellow. So what I would suggest, because peachy flesh it's a nice skin tone, but it's not super red, and that not quite as red, not quite as rosy complexion is what I would suggest is going to be more accurate for your samurai. As it settles over the brown that we've put into the recesses, it's going to bring it in a little bit and it will look, I think, a bit more realistic for that Japanese skin tone. Now for his clothing, technically this can be pretty much any color that you like. There are quite some interesting seasonal variations that were typical, but generally anything blue, green, even white or beige will work well. So what I've got here, this is Tyrian navy, but because it's quite an intense color, I have thinned it down. It's half and half with Speedpaint Medium. And I'm going to apply this over his shirt. Now it's a beautiful colour, but like I said, quite intense straight out of the pot. So thinning it down gives you an almost sort of denim appearance, but it's a lovely blue. Now I'm not going to thin down here, Pallid bone, and this is going over his trousers. Now a real quick little factoid here. These parts of fabric over the back of his calves were actually not part of his trousers. They are part of the leg armor. Now they were fabric. I'm going to paint them a different color. You could very easily paint them the same color as his trousers. It's not beyond the realm of possibility, and nobody's going to notice if you don't do them separately. But just for the sake of interest, we'll do it differently. Now, just because it's relatively easy to reach now, I'm going to paint in his belt. And here I'm going to use Slaughter Red. Now, this theoretically could have been likewise any color, but reds, blacks, beiges, dark browns would have been quite common. Now you'll see that areas like his legs, for example, and on this particular fella he's got a chest plate and then he's got a sort of flappy bit over the top. These are layered. They could have been the same color, like particularly if he were very well-to-do and he wanted his gear to look impressive, he'd probably make sure it were the same color, but there's no accounting for style or taste. So what I'm going to do is for the majority of sort of the undersuit, what I have here, this is Murder Scene, which is one of my favorite colors, and I've thinned this down with just a tiny bit of Speedpaint Medium. So the actual ratio here was 4 drops of Speedpaint to 1 drop of the Speedpaint Medium. You could get away, you don't need to thin this down if you don't really want to. But I'm going to use this as the predominant color for most of his lacquered armor. So, taking my time here and being as careful as possible, I'm going to go over these bits, so the undersides, his arms, and his leg armor with this stuff. Okay, now we're starting to get to some of the tricky bits. So you see here, if I flip him around, you've got on the back, as we'll see it the most easily, the lacing, which is holding these armor plates on. So this stuff is what's running through and making these little, the little blips and lines and what have you. Now I'm going to do this in 2 stages. What I'm going to use first of all is Maize Yellow, and I'm going to use this to paint in just the chords at the top of the armor. Because what I'm going to do is to paint the armor plates with another speed paint color in a moment, but then the actual these bits over the top, I'm going to have to paint that with a more traditional acrylic. All the same, doesn't take very long to do this. Here's where you can get quite, you can actually get really involved with this if you fancy, because this is where you can start introducing some of the patterns and making the lacing different colors and what have you. But for expediency's sake, let's just say that our chap here really likes yellow. I just realized I was about to motor through this pole without having actually shown you. I'm using Occultist Cloak. Any dark sort of lacquered color will work here. Geez, you see my hands shaking. What I would suggest is it's easiest to apply it like so, then turn it around and just do the same from the other side. And now at last we'll use Grim Black and paint in the rest of his armor. So this will also include his helmet. Take your time and go slow as you come near the edges of any detail. And remember, for now, just go straight over the top of the laces. Now that's actually most of the work done. And now what we want is to take care of the ties and straps that are holding his gear on. Now for this, what I've got is ruddy fur, and you could here use different colors. There's nothing saying that this all needs to be uniform, but likewise, I don't really want to fuss with 3 or 4 different colors just for his straps. So take your time here, and away we go. Now we're getting to the stage, there's not all that much left to do. If I'd thought about the color I was going to use for the banner earlier, I would have just stuck here to Slaughter Red, but same as with applying the wash, what I'm going to do is use a nice, large, flat, sweeping motion with my brush to make sure that's relatively smooth. flip them upside down, do the same on the other side, and then I'll get the little ties in a moment. And now at last we're going to switch to our more traditional acrylics. What I have is weapon bronze. And we're going to start with the crest on his helmet. Now this could have been painted. Commonly these would also be, just part of the helmet and painted in certain colors. If you've got a fella who's got antlers or something like that, then of course a bone color or similar, depending on what animal they're from. Now for his sword, what I have is plate mail metal. Now the blade itself, nice and quick, very simple there. The hilt here, the handguard rather, now on a ceremonial blade this could have been pretty much any color you fancied, but on a fighting blade it was ordinarily steel. So you could use a darker steel color like gunmetal or something if you fancied, but this will work just fine. As well, what I'm going to do is use this to dot in the little metal studs on, oh my goodness, the base of the outermost bits of armor. Unfortunately, there isn't really a quick way of doing this. This is patience and a bit of practice. Of course, if you are painting like 10mm or 15mm guys, I would probably skip this part entirely. But this dude, it's going to be a little bit more noticeable if I don't paint them. And then we come to, oh boy, the fun part. What I have here is a little bit of warped yellow on the end of my brush. And same as with the dots, there is not really a quick way of going about this, at least that I'm aware of. If you know a faster way of doing this, please let me know. I would love to hear it. But now we are dotting in the threads. Now here's where you can start changing things up. Like obviously I am doing them all in yellow, but there's nothing to stop you from doing the outer row in yellow and then doing the inner row in something else and so on and so forth. But for simplicity's sake, and so I don't drive myself bonkers, this fella is getting simple. Man, that's not the fun part. All the same, it does look very cool once it's done. And it's one of these things that once it's finished, you've got the miniature forever. So take the time, it will look cool. Now what I've got is a little bit of dark tone, and I'm just going to pop this over the hilt of the blade. I don't want to pop this over the entire blade because I want that to stay nice and shiny. At this point, you could also add a little bit of this over the crest, or even over his armor, but then you're going to have to come back and highlight that yellow again. So I'm not going to do that. Before I go ahead and base him, there's really just one last thing to do. So what I'm going to do is take him outside and hit him with a matte spray varnish. Today I'm using the Fireforge varnish because I like it. What a difference a varnish makes, right? Now what I've got is true brass, and I'm applying this now because putting a little bit of this over the stuff that I want to look gold-ish, if I do it before the varnish, it's going to look quite dull. Whereas if I just pop a little bit of this over the top, it keeps that nice metallic shine. As well, if you're feeling brave and you fancy doing some more dots, then finally, my secret weapon. This here is actually one of the Sharpie creative markers, and it is a paint marker. Now they do come in a couple of different styles, so if you want to pick one of these up, I would recommend looking for the brush tip style. The other one is a bullet tip, it's listed as, and it's a little rounder, more like a felt tip pen. I want a brush. So, you can go out and get some really funky decals or transfers, but since I don't have any handy, what I'm going to do is one little circle, two little circles. Bet you can count to 3 with me here. And then let's pop a little across the top. And there's a real quick Mori clan. Now I'll let this dry and then come back and give it another quick coat to make it nice and solid. But yeah, I love these things. They're real handy to have. So once I'm finished with this on both sides, let's just make sure I'm putting that in the right place. What I'll do is go ahead and pop his base on him. And the recipe for that one will be in the description. So, let's get a look at our mostly Speedpaint Samurai once he is all finished. And so there at last, our samurai is complete, and in true fashion, the hand-done banner looks better on one side than it does the other. I'd thoroughly recommend, if you are going to be doing an army where you do want uniformity, don't hand paint the badges if you don't have to. Go find some decals somewhere. So the miniatures themselves, like I said, they're alright. The Fireforge plastics, they go together really well, and the end result is pretty cool once you're done painting them. You've got a lot of freedom when you're painting samurai, so I will make sure that the really useful sites that I went and checked out, made sure I was going in the right direction with this, they will be linked in the description, so do check those out too. So thank you very much goes to Exit23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks, and I do mean it every time. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.